When we think about spring break, we usually think about escaping the daily grind of school or work. We think about sunny beaches, crowded house parties, and letting our guard down. But for predators and criminals, spring break is the perfect opportunity. It is a time when thousands of young people travel to unfamiliar locations, drink a little too much, and trust strangers far more than they normally would. Today, we are looking at three separate, true accounts of young college students who went looking for a fun escape, only to realize they had walked directly into highly organized, terrifying traps. These are not just stories about bad luck or being in the wrong place at the wrong time. These are stories about the chilling moment you realize that the friendly face across the room, or the cheap rental you found online, was actually a carefully laid snare, waiting for you to step inside. Each of these cases reveals a different level of calculation, from remote cabin setups to international kidnapping schemes, and finally, a bizarre, coordinated psychological trap that still defies full explanation. Our first story takes us back about 4 years ago, during a spring break that was supposed to be completely low-key. A young college student named Anna had been feeling completely overwhelmed by her difficult classes and wanted a simple cabin trip. She did not want a massive party or a crowded beach. She just wanted to disappear into the woods for a few days, turn off her phone, and have absolutely no obligations. Her brother Hunter was also on break from his school at the time, and he was already staying with Anna and her boyfriend. So, they decided to make it a group of 3. Her boyfriend, who is our narrator, went online to find a suitable place. He searched through various rental sites and eventually stumbled upon a listing for a cabin. It was located deep in the forest, completely isolated, which was exactly what they were looking for. But the most appealing part of the listing was the price. The cabin was incredibly cheap. It was much cheaper than any other rental in the area. The narrator remembered having a brief, passing thought that the price was almost too good to be true, but he quickly brushed it off. He figured they just got lucky with a last-minute deal, booked the place, and started packing their bags. They set out on a Friday afternoon, driving for hours down increasingly narrow roads. The sky was gray, and as they crossed the county line, a light drizzle began to hit the windshield. The windshield wipers on their old car made a steady, squeaking sound that added to the quiet atmosphere of the drive. They finally arrived at the property right around dinner time, just as the sun was beginning to set. As they drove down the long, unpaved driveway, the sense of isolation became very real. The trees on either side of the dirt path were thick and overgrown, almost reaching out to touch the sides of the car. The cabin was truly cut off from the rest of the world. Once they parked the car, they realized they could not even see the main road they had just driven on. At the time, they actually liked this. It felt like the perfect, peaceful escape from their hectic lives. But as they were unloading their heavy bags from the trunk, Hunter noticed something off. Next to the main cabin, there was a large wooden outbuilding, almost like a massive tool shed. Hanging from the heavy double doors of the shed was a brand new padlock. Hunter walked over and played with the lock for a second, noticing that the metal was clean, shiny, and completely rust-free. He mentioned to the group that the lock looked like it had been swapped out very recently. The narrator did not think much of it at the time. He told Hunter it was probably just the property owner, keeping some expensive maintenance equipment safe inside. They dropped the subject, grabbed their heavy bags, and headed inside the cabin to start making dinner. That first night went exactly as they had planned. They cooked a simple pasta meal, had a few drinks on the wooden front porch, and listened to the sounds of the forest. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and pine. Eventually, they went to bed pretty early, exhausted from the long drive. Sometime during the night, the light rain turned into a steady rhythmic downpour, pattering softly against the metal roof of the cabin. The woods became incredibly loud. It was a constant, heavy wall of sound, made by thousands of insects and frogs. For the narrator, the sound was actually very calming, and it helped him drift off into a deep sleep. But before he fully lost consciousness, he heard a heavy rustling and a thud in the distance. It sounded like something large was moving around out there in the dark forest. He figured it was just a deer or maybe a raccoon, so he did not let it worry him. He closed his eyes and fell asleep, Hours later, the narrator was suddenly jolted awake. His heart was beating fast, but he did not know what had triggered it. The bedroom was pitch black, and the air felt cold and damp. He lay perfectly still in the dark bed, straining his ears to hear over the sound of the rain. Then he heard it again, a solid, heavy thump. It sounded like something had just struck the wooden siding of the cabin. He looked at his phone, and the glowing clock showed it was around 2 in the morning. He froze under the covers, wondering if his mind was playing tricks on him, or if it was just part of a dream. He waited, barely breathing, hoping it was just a branch falling from a tree. But then a second thump echoed through the walls. It was identical to the first one, and it was definitely not a branch. The narrator rolled over to see if Anna was awake, but she was still sound asleep, her breathing slow and even. He realized he had to go investigate. The last thing he wanted to do was step out of bed. But he knew that if there was a bear or some other large animal poking around the cabin, it was better to know about it. He quietly got out of bed, grabbed a heavy metal flashlight from the nightstand, and walked into the living room. The windows of the cabin were dark, and the light rain made it almost impossible to see anything outside. He pressed his face against the cold glass, squinting into the darkness. As he swept his flashlight beam across the muddy ground near the outbuilding, he saw something that made his stomach drop. There, clearly illuminated by the faint light, was a set of fresh footprints in the mud. They were heading directly toward the side of the cabin. The narrator knew for a fact that these footprints could not belong to any of them. None of us had been outside the cabin after the rain had started, at least, not to his knowledge. He tried to rationalize it, thinking that maybe Hunter had gone out there without him realizing, so he figured he would ask him in the morning. Still, he was pretty confident that Hunter would not have done that, which made the situation all the more eerie. The footprints did not look like an animal's, although they were too far away to tell for sure. And if he had been unwilling to go outside earlier, there was absolutely no chance he was doing so after seeing what he saw. He made sure the place was locked up and went back to sleep. Unfortunately, the night was far from over. He woke up a few hours later to knocking on the front door, which is one of the most terrifying things he could imagine waking up to. Hearing that knocking meant there was a stranger out there, which actually got his heart going a little bit. It was just so late. He could not think of a good reason why someone would be knocking on a cabin door in the middle of nowhere at 4 in the morning. The knocking woke up Anna, who was about 10 times more scared than he was. He had to do something, so he walked over to the door. Before he could even announce himself, the person on the other side said he was a forest ranger and that there had been some kind of incident in the area, and he needed to do a welfare check. The narrator paused a bit before responding, mostly out of fear, but it was obvious the man already knew he was there. He told the man they were all good and did not need to be checked up on, saying he just wanted to get back to sleep. He thought that would do the trick because the man paused for a little while before saying anything. But then instead of leaving, the man said he would need to ask them a few questions. The narrator was instantly suspicious, and he was almost fully confident the person on the other side of the door was not any kind of law enforcement. At that point, Hunter had woken up too and was standing behind him. The narrator whispered to him to call the police, saying he would stall the guy at the door. He went back and forth with him, giving him nothing answers without telegraphing his suspicion. The man outside kept pressing, claiming there was a reported gas leak on the property, and that they were in immediate danger if they did not open up. This lie made the narrator even more suspicious, because the cabin did not have any gas lines. It was entirely electric. After a little back and forth, Hunter walked up to him and whispered that the police said no rangers had been dispatched to the area. That is what the narrator had suspected, but hearing Hunter actually vocalize it made his heart rate kick up again. He was scared and downright panicking at that point. It was 4 in the morning. They were truly in the middle of nowhere, and some guy was banging on the door pretending to be a ranger. The narrator did not know how, but it felt like the person on the porch could sense his fear, because the man raised his voice and started banging on the door a little harder. The narrator told the person he was not going to open up, and he was not going to answer any questions, which only seemed to anger him. The stranger started demanding he open the door, threatening to kick it down and telling him they would be arrested for failure to comply. That is when Anna screamed at him to go away, which only made things worse. The man started kicking the door with incredible force, and when it did not give, he stomped around to the side of the cabin. The narrator yelled at Anna to go lock herself in the bathroom, which she did. Hunter and the narrator grabbed some knives from the kitchen knife block and just kind of tracked the guy's sounds around the cabin. He was beyond terrified, but he had no choice but to prepare for a fight. This guy meant them harm. This guy was trying to break into their cabin. Before the narrator could react, one of the windows shattered into a million pieces. The guy had thrown a large rock through it. The cold night air and rain came rushing into the room. The narrator was ready for him to jump through, but the man did not. It was the tensest moment of his life, standing there in the dark with a kitchen knife, waiting for an attacker to climb through a broken window. After what felt like forever, with Hunter and him just staring at the broken window, they heard police sirens approaching in the distance. The stranger must have heard them too, because they heard the sound of heavy footsteps running away through the brush. The police searched the area, but miraculously, they could not find the guy. Hunter was furious. He was practically yelling at the officers that the freak had been on the property less than a minute before they arrived, so he had to be close by still. The officers said there was nothing they could do and advised them to just pack up and leave. So that is exactly what they did. It is not like they had much of a choice. But Hunter would not let go of how incompetent those officers were being. It was only after the fear and adrenaline wore off, and they were driving away, that the narrator realized how truly insane what just happened was. For someone to even know about that cabin in the first place was so unlikely. It was like they planned it, and what they even wanted was a mystery in and of itself. Our second story takes us to the spring of 2016, when the narrator was a senior in college. He was in a fraternity, and one of the traditions that came with being in Greek life, at least at their school, was that you spent spring break with your fraternity brothers, and whatever sorority or sororities you were affiliated with. The groups were typically huge, usually 30 or 40 people, and everyone packed into the same rental or resort for the whole week. The narrator did not pretend it was the most wholesome experience you could have in your early 20s, but he also would not pretend he did not have a ridiculous amount of fun doing it. That particular year, the plan was Acapulco. He did not remember whose idea it was originally, but within a few weeks, they had something like 40 people booked at this resort on the Pacific coast of Mexico. The main character in this story is not actually the narrator, it is his buddy Sahil. To put it as nicely as possible, Sahil was the kind of person who, no matter what situation you put him in, was going to find a way to make it louder and more complicated than it needed to be. He had absolutely zero self-preservation instincts, and no impulse control, which was especially problematic because he was incredibly impulsive. They were maybe 3 or 4 days into the trip when a group of them decided to go to the local clubs. It was a great time right up until Sahil, true to form, started scanning the room looking for someone who could get him something stronger than whatever was in his glass. It was a terrible idea. They were in a foreign country in a city, with a reputation that was not exactly clean. Plus, nobody in their group spoke any Spanish. The narrator told him to drop it. A couple of the other guys said the same thing, and Sahil said he would, but the narrator knew he would not. He had been through this too many times before. They kept an eye on him for a while, but the club was genuinely enormous, and after a while, they kind of stopped tracking where he was. Sahil was a grown man, and the narrator was not about to waste his night babysitting him. He figured Sahil was somewhere in the crowd, and disappearing into a crowd was not unusual for him. The narrator went about his night with his other friends, and it was a great time. Sahil never turned up though, which the narrator found stranger and stranger the later it got. He did not remember what triggered it, but one second they were all drinking and partying, having a good time, and the next they were all frantically trying to contact Sahil. He was not answering anyone's text messages, and when they called his phone it went straight to voicemail, meaning it was dead. That was not good. Sahil may have been a crazy dude, but he was an organizational freak. He would not just let his phone die like that. After a little while longer, they made the call to leave. Odds were he was back at the resort, and they would find him passed out in his bed. The sidewalk outside the club was a mess of people trying to get cabs all at once. So a few of them walked about a block and a half before pulling out their phones to call a driver. It was probably around 1 in the morning, and they were just standing there waiting on a driver, when who did they see but Sahil stumbling towards us out of the darkness. They ran up to him, and it was immediately obvious that something seriously bad had happened. He was a complete wreck. His shirt was torn almost fully off, and his face was completely swollen. Not to mention the fact that he was limping. They got him into the car and back to the resort. A couple of guys kept asking him what happened, and he kept saying he would explain later. It was not until they were back in one of the rooms that he finally started talking. Sahil told them that he had found a guy near the bar, a short Mexican guy who did not speak much English. He had a friend with him who was supposedly doing the translating. Sahil made it clear what he was looking for, and the guy understood. Sahil told them he was reluctant right away, because something felt off about the translator specifically, but he could not put his finger on what. Then the short guy pulled out a small sample and offered it to him right there, and Sahil tried it. He said it was good, and that is kind of where his judgment evaporated. After that, the short guy said he could not do business inside the club and told Sahil to come outside with him. Sahil knew he should not have gone, but he went anyway. They walked out a side exit, and there was a dark sedan waiting just outside the door. Before Sahil really understood what was happening, they were already pulling him into the back seat. They drove. Sahil said it felt like maybe 15 or 20 minutes, but he was panicking and not exactly thinking straight, so he honestly was not sure. What he was sure about was that they went rummaging through his pockets the second the car started moving. They robbed him, and when he tried to resist, they beat him senseless. They destroyed his phone and stripped him of everything of value. What saved him was that at some point during the drive, one of the guys asked him why there were so many Americans in the city right now, and Sahil, without really thinking about it, explained that he was there on spring break with dozens of other students from the same university who were all staying at the same resort. He had no idea at the time that he was essentially talking his way out of being killed or trafficked. The two guys went back and forth in Spanish for a while after that, their voices sounding increasingly worried and tense. Then the car pulled over, and they threw him out onto the dirt. He landed on some random road he did not recognize and just started walking. He did not know where he was, so he had no choice but to just walk in the direction he thought the car had driven, and by some miracle, it turned out to be the correct decision. The narrator really did not know what would have happened to Sahil had he not run into them, or if he had left the club 20 minutes sooner. They debated calling the police for about 3 seconds before unanimously deciding that was probably the worst idea for everyone involved, Sahil included. Besides the guys in their immediate group, nobody at the resort ever found out what happened. Our third and final story is something the narrator has been keeping bottled up for quite a while now. This happened during spring break of his junior year of college. He graduated a while ago, so this was going back a few years. He mentions that he is kind of a paranoid person. He has just always been naturally observant, skeptical, and cynical. Those honestly are not the healthiest traits to have, and he ends up spending a lot of time overthinking and worrying about things that do not matter, but he cannot control it. His ex-girlfriend Anna had this friend named Lena. Lena was the type of girl who always knew where the party was, and was plugged into every group chat and social circle imaginable. Which is why it was not surprising in the slightest when she approached Anna with a spring break plan. She said a girl she knew had told her about a lake house trip out in the Ozarks. According to Lena, a bunch of people from that girl's sorority and some of the affiliated fraternities were renting this big house on the water for the week. It sounded pretty standard. The narrator was not exactly the spring break type, but Anna really wanted to go, and he did not have a reason not to, so he figured why not. There were 4 of them, the narrator, Anna, Lena, and Lena's boyfriend, Colby. Colby opted to drive because he had the biggest car, which was pretty cool of him. It was a long but good drive, and everyone was in a great mood. The final stretch of the drive was this long, twisting road that did not have many houses on it, surrounded by dense trees. They pulled up to the house around 5 in the afternoon, and the narrator's first thought was that Lena had severely undersold the place. The house was massive, sitting right on the lake with this humongous wraparound deck and a dock that went way out over the water. It was the kind of house that makes you wonder who actually owns it. There were also way more cars in front of the house than the narrator was expecting. Lena had made it sound like there would only be 15 to 20 people, but he counted at least 25 cars in the grass lot next to the house, with more parked down the road because there was no room. That is where Colby had to park his SUV. They walked up the front steps to see a guy standing near the front door. He seemed to be about their age or maybe a little older. He introduced himself, but the narrator did not remember his name, so we will just call him the host. He seemed friendly enough, but the very first thing the narrator clocked about him was that his speech seemed rehearsed, like he had had this exact conversation multiple times. And to be fair, he probably had, but it still felt weird. You know those safety speeches fraternity pledges have to give before letting you into a party? It felt kind of like that. The host gave them the rundown. He told them where to find their rooms, how to navigate the house, and when they could do this or that. Typical house rule stuff. Then he brought up the car keys. He said the roads around the lake were narrow and dangerous at night, especially after people had been drinking. He told them it was a liability thing, and that they were collecting everyone's keys at the door. He had this whole little speech about it. Colby sort of shrugged before handing his keys over. The host made a big show about thanking Colby for playing by the rules, which the narrator thought was kind of obnoxious. Then he opened the door and let them in. The narrator made a mental note of what he was doing with the car keys, and he saw a big glass bowl of other car keys on the table in the foyer. The host tossed Colby's keys into the bowl and told them to have fun before stepping back outside and closing the door. They went and found their room, which had 2 double beds and a tiny balcony that overlooked the water. They put their stuff away and went back downstairs. Lena was really eager to find her friends, so they followed her. It did not take long to figure out where the main lounge was. It was this giant open room on the first floor that was lined with full glass windows, so you could get a wraparound view of the water. It was honestly pretty awesome. There must have been at least 30 people hanging out in that one room, but the weird thing was that Lena did not recognize a single one of them. They all looked like college kids, Greek life people even. But Lena could not find her friend or anyone else she knew in the crowd. The narrator was not just going to stand there in the corner, so he walked over to the fridge, grabbed a beer for himself and Colby, and made his way over to the pool table, which no one was using. The narrator had never had a hard time connecting with new people, so he did not really care that they did not know anyone. Colby did not seem to care either. They played pool, talked, drank, and just enjoyed the vibe. Their girlfriends came over a little later and told them Lena's friend was not answering her phone. They seemed overly concerned about it, but Colby and the narrator told them it was fine, and it really did feel fine at the time. The first night was actually really fun. Colby and the narrator socialized with a bunch of people who were all really cool. Anna and Lena got along with the girls, and there seemed to be an unlimited supply of alcohol and games. But there was one thing that was nagging at the narrator despite all the fun he was having. It was the host. He was not really partying, but he was always there, walking through the rooms and occasionally talking to people. The narrator's first thought was that the host was enjoying some slightly bolder substances in some back room with a select few people, but he felt like that was unlikely because he never saw a drink in the host's hand. At one point, he saw the host standing near the back door with a clipboard, like an actual physical clipboard with paper on it, and he was writing something down. Most of the party felt like strangers getting to know each other, which is kind of what the narrator expected. But there were maybe 8 to 10 people who interacted with each other differently. At first, the narrator just thought a big portion of the group already knew each other, but he could not help but notice that some of the people who seemed familiar with each other introduced themselves during games. As more time passed, he also realized that the four of them were not merging with some bigger group that all knew each other, but rather the whole group was split into a bunch of smaller groups like theirs. Besides those 10 or so people, no one knew anyone beyond the people they had pulled up with. He mentioned it to Anna, and she said he was overthinking things, which was probably true. She was also pretty wasted at that point, so he was not going to complicate things. Lena's friend never showed up that first night. The next morning, the narrator woke up earlier than everyone else. He went down to the kitchen and made himself a coffee. Then he went out on the deck to sit by himself for a while. He made note of the fact that the bowl with everyone's keys was not by the front door anymore, which was a little odd. He wanted to be left alone, so he chose to sit on the side of the house with the driveway to his left and the water to his right. It was actually really peaceful. Around mid-morning, he noticed a couple he had seen the night before packing up their stuff. They said goodbye to a few people on the porch, and the narrator watched them drive out of sight. Fast forward to later that night, and they were sitting by the bonfire. The narrator was sitting with Anna and a few other people when he happened to glance across the fire toward the far end of the circle. There was a couple sitting together slightly further back from the group than everyone else. They were positioned with the fire between them, which made it harder to get a clean look. But he kept watching. He realized it was the same guy and girl from earlier, the ones who had packed their bags and left in the morning. He was dead certain of it. He told Anna, and she gave him this confused look. She had not seen them leave, so she probably assumed he was misremembering things. There was not much he could do to convince her. So instead, he just got up and immediately made his way through the house. He remembered which car was theirs, so he was going to see if it was still gone. He made it to the driveway, and to his surprise, the car was not there. Despite that, he was positive the people he had seen were the ones who had left. But by the time he got back to the bonfire, they were gone. He could not find them anywhere, and it bugged him for the rest of the night. He did not bother telling Colby or Lena, and every time he mentioned it to Anna, she told him he was being a psychotic buzzkill. The next morning, he made it a point to wake up really early again. He wanted to go for a walk. He was not really sure what it was he was looking for, but he needed to convince himself that he was not trapped, and that there was something outside that house and those people. About a quarter-mile down the road, past a bend where you could not see anything from the house, there was an equipment shed, some kind of storage building for groundskeeping staff. He walked around it, and his jaw damn near hit the floor. It was the couple's car from the day before. He was sure of it. He just stood there, staring at it. He did not know how long. He was not scared yet. It was more like confirmation of something he already knew, but had not been able to prove. He turned around and walked back to the house without telling anyone. He was starting to freak out after that. Why would someone pretend to leave? And then he started thinking about those people they had been saying goodbye to, and he wondered if they were in on it as well. He knew what he had to do. That afternoon, he found that couple near the dock. It took him a really long time to find them, and he had to make up some excuse to tell Anna. He did not even sugarcoat it. He just bluntly asked them if they had left the morning before. They both gave him a funny look and acted like he was crazy, but he could tell his question struck a nerve. He swore it was like everyone around could hear their conversation. There were not that many people around, but while he was standing there, everyone quieted down a little bit, and he could not help but feel like there were eyes on him. Luckily, Anna appeared out of nowhere and told him to have a drink with her. He initially wanted to press that couple, but the way everyone else reacted made him feel deeply uncomfortable in a way that is hard to describe. He told Anna everything, and she actually took him seriously when he brought up the car detail. Then she went on to tell him that she had picked up on some weird stuff herself, like some of the girls having almost identical backstories and stuff like that. He suggested leaving early, but she told him that was probably premature. Either way, the bad feeling he had gotten on the first day was getting worse and worse. By the time he woke up the next morning, he made the decision that they were leaving. Anna agreed. Colby and Lena were a different story. Colby straight up laughed at him. He said he was not cutting the trip short because the narrator had a theory. Lena admitted it was weird that her friend had basically ghosted her and that she did not recognize a single person in the house, but she was not ready to panic over a parked car. They argued about it for a little, and the narrator was actually stunned by how stubborn they were both being. It is not like Anna and the narrator could have left on their own. They needed Colby's car. They ended up compromising, and the plan was to stay one final night. The narrator was cool with that until they went downstairs for breakfast. Every single set of eyes was on him. He felt it, and he did not like it. It was not obvious, and he tried convincing himself he was just having a paranoid freak-out. But people were definitely looking at him. A lot of people, which he found incredibly off-putting, because most of the people that were looking at him had not even been part of the group that had seen him question that couple. He started feeling like something really, really terrible was going to happen if they stayed in that house for even a moment more. Anna felt the eyes too, because she whispered to him that people were looking. The narrator got up from where they were sitting and walked right over to the host, who was standing near the corner of the room. He told the host they had to take off and that he needed his keys. The host smiled like a robot, then asked if everything was okay. The narrator told him something came up and they needed to head home, to which the host actually asked what happened. The narrator had not thought of a fake excuse, so he just told him it was a family emergency. The host kept diverting the conversation, saying things like, some people had planned a boat thing for the evening, and that the nights always get better as the end of the week approaches. He was doing everything he could to get them to stay, all while still smiling like a freak. The narrator did not care. He told him again that he needed the keys. He could not verbally explain how awful that feeling was. There was a room full of at least 20 people, and every single one of them was staring at him. The host did not respond, and his charming guy act was gone. He was not smiling anymore. He gave this blank, dead-eyed look that creeped the narrator out. Some random girl who was sitting nearby broke the silence by saying, "That is not a good idea." The narrator turned around to look at her, and she was scowling at him. He did not know what to say. He looked across the room and saw Anna, Lena, and Colby, and they all looked horrified. The host finally said, "Okay, fine," and told the narrator to follow him inside. He saw Anna getting up to follow, but when the host saw her move, he put his hand out and said no, in a loud, aggressive way that genuinely startled the narrator. It was almost violent. The host told them that only the narrator was to follow him, so that is what he did. The host led him through a maze of hallways before they reached a room with everyone's keys hanging on hooks. The host did not even ask which set was Colby's. He just picked them out because he clearly already knew. The narrator thought the host was going to attack him or withhold the keys, but he handed them over. Then the host said, "You are making a mistake." The narrator did not give a single care. As soon as he had the keys in his hand, he made his way back over to his group. When he got back to that main room, the music was back on, and people were laughing and talking again like nothing had happened. It was freaky. Anna, Colby, and Lena were in the same spot, and the narrator told them they were going. They were packed and out of there in 10 minutes. The entire time, the narrator felt like someone was going to try and stop them, but no one did. As Colby started driving off, the narrator looked back at the house to see the most unsettling thing yet. There were about a dozen people standing on the deck watching them leave. They were standing in a perfect line, not talking, and it was very obvious they were watching them. He noticed a couple more people looking through the windows, which pretty much confirmed what he had been suspecting all along. There was something up with that house. For the rest of the break, Lena tried getting in touch with the girl who had supposedly organized the trip. She called and texted and tried every platform she could think of, but got absolutely nothing back. She was starting to think something had actually happened to her. It was not until they were back at school that Lena finally tracked the girl down. This is honestly the craziest part of the story. It turned out that her phone had been stolen about 2 weeks before spring break. She had gotten a new number, but had not told everyone yet. The person who told Lena about the plan was not her friend. It was some stranger who had access to her stolen phone and contacts. Not a single message had actually come from her. The group talked about going to the police, but none of them could articulate what crime had actually been committed against them. They went to a party. It was weird, and nobody technically did anything illegal to them. But the setup was off to the point where they felt like one more night of staying in that lake house would have had some kind of major consequence. One that the narrator says he still cannot even begin to imagine. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.